If you open an incognito Google search window and type in, "How do I world build?" the most asked question is always, how do I world build culture? And that's because culture is a massive part of world building and a complicated section that is difficult to wrap into a single, reasonable length answer. Today, I'm going to try and answer that question with another episode of World Building Blueprints from Just-in-Time Worlds with your host, Marie Mullaney. If you're watching this on YouTube, there is a playlist where you can watch the previous episodes in the information card. If you're listening to this in a podcast app, the previous episodes are available there. In this episode, we're going to talk about world-building cultures via a model I developed that I call Just-in-Time World Building's Circles of Culture. This model gives you a handy way to break down and organize the cultural elements of your fictional worlds so they feel rich, interconnected, and real. So grab your notebooks and let's get started with the innermost circle, cultural ideology. At the heart of any culture is its ideology, the core values and beliefs that drive everything else. This is where we think about those big questions. Is the culture hierarchical or does it lean towards egalitarianism? Do they value the collective good over individual achievement, or is it the other way around? Are they all about freedom and personal expression, or do they prefer order and tradition? And finally, are they rooted in their traditions, or are they progressive, always looking forward? These ideological choices set the tone for everything else in the culture, from laws to art. Think of this as the foundation of the house. Without it, everything else crumbles. And as with every other circle that we'll discuss today, we have covered this in a previous podcast. So check that out if you need more detail creating this circle or any other circle that we're going to discuss today for your culture. And let's move on to the second circle, cultural norms. Moving outward, we hit norms. These are the day-to-day behaviors that stem from the core ideology. We're talking about things like mores, the moral expectations like honesty or loyalty, folkways, everyday customs like how people greet each other or what they wear, taboos, the things that are simply not done in this culture. Think breaking sacred rules or violating social order. Cultural norms are where your world starts to feel alive because they dictate how people interact in their daily lives. And next up is the third circle, cultural symbols. Symbols are the tools cultures use to express themselves. This includes language, gestures, flags, icons, and even naming conventions. Does your culture have a specific symbol that's sacred? Maybe they communicate through an intricate sign language, or perhaps their naming conventions hint at family or clan histories. Symbols are subtle, but they're incredibly effective for immersing your audience in the world you're building. And now we reach the fourth circle, kinship, which defines relationships. Is family central to this culture, or are kinship ties loose? Do clans and tribes play a major role? What about rites of passage? Do they mark significant life stages? This layer is especially important when you're building social systems. It answers questions about loyalty, inheritance, and even conflict. The fifth circle, hierarchy, follows hard on the heels of kinship. Most cultures have some way of organizing power. Is it a rigid class system or a more fluid structure? Is religion tied to leadership? How do people move up or down in status? The hierarchy layer sets the stage for political intrigue, rebellion, and even day-to-day frustrations. And speaking of political intrigue, the sixth circle is political systems and laws. Once you've nailed down the hierarchy, you can explore politics and laws. This is the formalization of the power structure. It's where governance, legal systems, and cultural influence converge. For example, are laws based on tradition, religion, or practicality? How does the system reinforce or challenge the hierarchy. This layer helps ground your culture in practical reality. And then finally, the seventh circle, cultural expression. Here we get into the fun stuff: art, music, ritual, sports. This is how a culture's identity shines. It reflects their core values and adds a ton of personality to your world. What kind of art does your culture produce? Are there rituals tied to their religion or their history? This layer is all about bringing everything together in a tangible way. However, the circles alone are not enough. So, we have some cross-section lines that drive all the way through the circle and affect every layer of the culture. The first set of lines are the material conditions of the culture. These include things like the economy. What do they trade? What's the currency? Technology. Are they forging steel or harnessing magic? Geography. How does the environment shape their daily lives? Food and shelter. What do they eat? How do they live? For us as fantasy world builders, material conditions also include magic and fantasy elements, like weird minerals or magical creatures. Material conditions ground your culture in practicality, shaping everything from their laws to their ideology and their art. Another set of cross-section lines are identities: race, gender, religion, and sexuality. These factors influence and are influenced by every layer of culture. They can create subcultures, intersections, and areas of conflict or synthesis. For instance, if a culture has rigid gender roles, you might see distinct subcultures form around each gender with their own norms and expressions. Of course, you want to consider your fantasy elements here too. Wizards might have their own identity. Or you could have fantastical species like bird people with their own identities living in the same culture as stock standard humans in a city-state that serves as a melting pot for the cultures of the lands around it. The city would have a culture with the identities of each species running through it as subcultures. To demonstrate this model, let's take an example from our world. I picked the Roman Republic as an ancient culture I know well and broke it down into a model at a high level. The core circle, cultural ideology. This broke down as follows. Hierarchy versus egalitarianism. The Roman Republic was strongly hierarchical, with a clear division between classes, patricians and plebeians, and an emphasis on maintaining social order. However, it also contained elements of egalitarianism, such as the rights of citizens to vote in assemblies and the gradual extension of political rights to the plebeians. Collectivism was deeply ingrained in Roman society, with an emphasis on the welfare of the state, res publica, above individual interest. The concept of civic duty was paramount, and the success of the Republic was considered a collective responsibility, though it must be noted that they did also celebrate individuals, like with triumphs for generals and so on. The Roman Republic balanced personal freedoms with a strong sense of order enforced by law and tradition. The legal system, based on the 12 tables, provided a structured framework within which personal freedoms could be exercised. The Roman Republic was fundamentally traditional, rooted in the mos maiorum, the customs of the ancestors. However, it did show progressive tendencies, particularly in its adaptation to changing circumstances, such as the extension of citizenship and the reforms of the Gracchi brothers. In terms of the second circle, cultural norms, the mores of the Roman Republic was dictated by the mos maiorum, which created the moral code, emphasizing virtues like pietas, duty to the gods, family and state, gravitas, seriousness, and virtus, manly excellence. These norms were deeply embedded in Roman identity. In terms of folkways, Roman society had a range of everyday practices, from public bathing and communal dining to specific modes of dress, such as the toga, which was an indication of citizenship. There were also taboos like the violation of religious sanctity or the desecration of temples, failure to fulfill civic duties, or acts that disrupted the social order were heavily tabooed and could result in severe social and legal repercussions. And then we come to cultural symbols. Latin was the lingua franca of the Republic, not just in communication, but as a carrier of Roman legal, religious, and literary traditions and a means to tie the Republic together. Rhetoric was a highly valued skill, especially in politics and law. The Roman Republic also had the fasces as symbolized authority and power, while the eagle represented the Republic's military might and divine favor. The Senate and people of Rome, SPQR, became a symbol of the state. In terms of naming conventions, Roman names followed a strict tripartite structure, which was a praenomen, a nomen, and a cognomen, reflecting an individual's family lineage and social status. And that brings us to the kinship model of the Romans. The familia was patriarchal, with the paterfamilias holding almost absolute power. The extended family and client-patron relationships were also pretty crucial. The gens clan was a key social structure linking individuals to a broader network of kin and ancestors. Political alliances were often formed along these lines. In terms of the social hierarchy and leadership, the Republic was led by elected officials, consuls and praetors, and a powerful Senate. The cursus honorarum outlined the sequence of public offices that ambitious men could hold. Society was stratified into patricians, plebeians, and slaves. Over time, the equestrian class emerged as a powerful group within the Republic. Religious offices, such as those of the Pontifex Maximus and the augurs, were often held by elite members of society, intertwining religious and political authority. In terms of the Sixth Circle, political systems and laws, the Republic was characterized by a mixed constitution, with powers shared between the Senate, the assemblies, and various elected magistrates. The legal framework, beginning with the 12 Tables, was central to the Roman identity and governance. The Roman law was complex and evolved over time, with emphasis on property rights, civic responsibilities, and the sanctity of contracts. Legalism was a defining feature of Roman culture. The legal and political structures reinforced social hierarchy, maintained public order, and codified traditional values, ensuring the continuity of the Republic's way of life and supporting the inner circles, as it must under this model. And finally, in terms of cultural expressions, Roman art was influenced by the Greeks but focused on realism and public monuments, reflecting the Republic's values and achievements. Public spectacles, including gladiatorial games, chariot races, and theatre, with both forms of entertainment and expressions of Roman power and civic pride. Religious festivals, public sacrifices, and triumphs, military parades, were central to Roman public life, reinforcing the connection between the state, the gods, and the people. And important rites included the coming-of-age ceremonies for boys, marriage rituals, and funerary customs, all of which reinforced social roles and the continuity of the family and state. So that's the main circles of the Roman Republic. Let me know whether you thought that I defined the culture well at the high level, and whether the model works for you. But, as I said, we also need to consider intersecting lines. So let's talk about the intersecting lines for the Roman Republic, starting with the material conditions. The economy was primarily agricultural, supplemented by trade and military conquest, which brought in wealth and slaves. The distribution of wealth and land ownership was a constant source of tension. Romans were advanced in engineering and construction, building roads, aqueducts, and military fortifications that supported the expansion and maintenance of the Republic. Rome's central location in the Mediterranean facilitated trade and military dominance, allowing the Republic to expand and secure resources. Roman cuisine reflected the agricultural basis of the economy, with an emphasis on grains, olives, and wines. Banquets and public feasts were important social events. Then, our other intersecting lines are identities. Roman identity was initially tied to citizenship in the city of Rome, but expanded to include people from across the Republic as they were granted citizenship. Ethnic diversity increased as Rome conquered new territories. Roman society was patriarchal, with clearly defined gender roles for men and women. Women had limited public roles but could exercise influence within the family. Religion was integral to Roman identity, with a polytheistic belief system that is closely tied to the state. Religious rituals and the favor of the gods were seen as essential to the success of the Republic. Religious offices were often held by political leaders, and the state religion reinforced social norms and the authority of the state. Now, those identities bring up an interesting point. No culture exists in a vacuum. Even in an isolated kingdom, you'll have subcultures, whether regional, racial, or religious. Each subculture inherits elements from the parent culture, but adapts them to suit its needs. For example, if, like the Roman Republic, the culture has strong gender roles, each gender might form its own subculture with regards to some of the circles. The model accommodates this by means of inheritance. For each subculture, assume that most elements are inherited from the parent culture, except where altered. And each culture then contains their subcultures. For example, consider this as part of the Roman Republic subculture for women. Circle 1, 2, and 3 are unchanged. Circle 4, kinship. Women are always under the authority of their pater familias and cannot lead the family. They may, however, exert influence in the family, especially over the affairs of children. In Circle 5, hierarchy, women may not hold any elected office, however, some religious authority extends to women, especially in the shape of the Vestal Virgins, who tend the flame symbolic to Rome. In Circle 6, politics, women were not considered citizens in their own right, but could only be citizens through their connection to men. A woman was only a citizen if her father or husband was a citizen, and that meant that women could not vote, so could not participate in politics in any way. The law also did not regard women and men as equal. And finally, in Circle 7, cultural expression, the Roman cultural reverence for sport extends to women, and there are some references to women swimming, wrestling, and even participating in gladiatorial bouts. So this circle remains unchanged for women and men. For other subcultures like race, religious organizations, and regional variations, it's possible to create similar variations on the culture, where everything is assumed to be the same unless otherwise specified. With regards regional variation, consider a city versus a country. The USA is a good example in this regard. Each state forms a subculture, and often the cities in a state will form additional subcultures which are grandchildren of the actual American culture. There are also subcultures formed through identities like race that span across regional subcultures, but are also influenced by those regional and national subcultures. And that brings us to neighboring cultures and how to handle cultures intersecting. Cultures that come into contact with each other will always influence each other. The cultures will first encounter each other at the expression layer and then slowly move inward in contact, affecting each other and borrowing from each other. If you have multiple cultures or subcultures, lay their models side by side and consider how they borrowed from each other. In terms of cultural touchpoints or intersections formed by such cultural contact, remember that they could represent areas of conflict, exchange, or synthesis. And finally, in terms of the model, we must address the history of a culture. Creating the history of a culture is very much part of creating the model for the culture. A culture's history isn't just background flavor, it's the why behind its values, norms, and structures. Perhaps the culture was previously part of another culture, but broke away from their parent culture to found a new culture, like the Romans who believed themselves to be descendants of the Trojans, or the Puritans sailing away from Europe to the Americas. In such a case, the model would start as a subculture and grow into its own culture over time. Or perhaps certain of the lines intersecting the culture shifted, like an additional identity was added or the material conditions changed, causing an earthquake in the culture and altering even its core values. For an example of this, let's look at the Roman Republic and its transformation into the Roman Empire. As the Republic grew, its material conditions, like wealth from conquests, power and resources centralized in the hands of the elite, undermining the egalitarian elements of the Republic's ideology. The culture of the citizen soldier faded as the legions became professional, paid armies. These changes rippled outward, affecting every layer of the cultural model. By the time the Republic gave way to the Empire, the core ideology had shifted to embrace stronger hierarchy and less civic egalitarianism. The old democratic structures were still there in name, but the culture itself had transformed into something new. This kind of cultural evolution is a powerful tool for world building. Maybe your fantasy culture broke away from a parent culture, like the Puritans leaving Europe to form their own society. Or perhaps your culture is in the middle of a major upheaval, caught between old traditions and new ideas. By mapping out these shifts in your cultural model, you can create dynamic, living worlds where the past influences the present in meaningful ways that generate conflict. And with conflict comes plot and reader immersion. And that's my model of circles in full, starting with the ideology and building out the layers up to cultural expression and then adding magic, fantasy, economics, religion, and the other identity lines. Let me know what you think of the model in the comments or by sending the podcast fan mail. Next month, we'll hit the complicated beast called religion. Religion is one of the most polarizing and nuanced aspects of culture, so we'll spend some time unraveling its role in shaping civilizations, power structures, and conflict. Make sure you're subscribed if you want to get those episodes when they dropped. I'm sure they won't be controversial at all. And a very huge thanks to my members for sponsoring this podcast, and a special shout out to Lupex Lakeshire, Katie Kofi Mug, and Tony Lamana, just-in-timers of the Build It in Stone level, and Pablo Barrios, Patricio, and Aya Shimimaru, Tiffany Felix, and Dylan Batera, just-in-timers of the Build It in Wood level. All members not only get early access to my videos, but also get access to the worksheets that accompanies this podcast. The worksheets include prompts to build your culture using the model and examples to guide you along the way. You, dear listener, can join their ranks for as little as a cup of coffee a month and also unlock all these perks. But don't feel pressured. You can also support me just by sharing this podcast around. And on that note, I will see you soon for another episode. Remember, build what you need, when you need it, and happy world building.